Welcome back to another video. Today I'm working on a few projects and wanted to take a little time to talk about being thrifty on a small farm and some of the ways that we can make that happen here in our context. So it's early July here on the farm and we've been getting into some serious summer weather. The first 3 days of July were a lot like this, really hot, sunny mornings, and then peak mugginess around noon or so, and a really beautiful afternoon thunderstorm. So some of my favorite weather of the summer. I hope that it keeps up like that. I'm standing here in front of what is in progress, our turkey tractor. It's a adapted model from Salatin Designs. He likes to call it a gobbledygo. And essentially it's just a old trailer frame that we found on Facebook Marketplace and being built up with lumber to make essentially a very simple roosting structure that can be moved around the pastures easily. Now, we're still in progress here. I still have to put the roofing on, and interestingly, turkeys, they're very hardy creatures, so the only cover over the top is just going to be shade cloth to get them a bit of shade in the heat of summer, but it's okay if it rains through that permeable material. They don't mind one bit. What we have is a mix of new dimensional lumber that was left over from another project and reclaimed lumber that, if we're using in this application where it's not getting in contact with the ground, should last quite a while. We have multiple sawmills in this area within a 30-minute radius. And when we first moved here, I searched that radius and gave them all a call to see if they had sources of unusable lumber. In a sawmill, especially a big industrial scale one, they make mistakes where maybe the saw doesn't cut it right, or there's splits in some of the wood where they can't sell that retail. And some sawmills, if you call, they have an area that you can go pick up just as an individual or business. And so we're lucky, within 20 minutes of here, there's a mill that will load up my truck with hundreds and hundreds of board feet of nice dimensional lumber with really minimal defects that don't really affect me at all, especially with kind of outdoor projects like this. And the charge is less than 5% of retail costs. So to fill up my pickup truck to capacity, it only costs me about $80 to $100, where if the same lumber was purchased new, that quantity of board feet and dimensions, it would be in the order of multiple thousands of dollars. So for applications like this, we can build up really cheap infrastructure. The trailer there was a deal I found for just $150, and all told on this project, with the hardware and the retail lumber, the shade cloth, and the reclaimed lumber, this entire build is going to cost less than $250. Now, even with turkeys as a bit of a side enterprise for us, just raising a batch for the holidays in the fall, that value of $250 for the main piece of infrastructure on the enterprise is going to pay for itself with just a couple of turkeys, maybe 3 or 4 turkeys. So those are really good numbers on startup investments on a business like that. The main cost of the turkey enterprise is buying in baby turkeys and the feed costs. So while those are running costs that are going to be accounted no matter how big or small we scale the enterprise, if we can reduce our startup costs and have our profit margins be much greater because we're not paying off expensive infrastructure, then we're happy with that. And that's the approach we were taking with a lot of the startups on the farm. The clover cover crop is really taking off in the tree lanes. There's a pawpaw there. It was a little slow to get started, but now it's really becoming the dominant plant in the space between the trees. So in an earlier video, I talked a little bit about why we're going with the Salatin style pens to get started. One being that it's a proven model that has worked in a lot of farm contexts, and while we're learning this property and scaling the enterprise, we want to take as many unknowns and variables out of the process as possible. Right now they're all empty. We have a batch of chicks in the brooder that'll go out next week, but so far we've been pretty happy with this design. It's definitely not our long-term strategy, but I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of doing it in our first year here on our farm. Much like the turkey tractor, it's a very low cost way to get started. These aren't fancy structures. They're made out of just dimensional lumber that we use a table saw to rip into thinner dimensions so that the structure is lighter, easier to move by hand. It doesn't require very many tools or that much expertise in carpentry or building to build a nice sturdy version of this. And the cost on all of these came out, we built 6 to get started this year, came out even with high materials costs in this day and age to around $2,500, a little bit more, which again, if we're thinking about an enterprise startup cost, that's paid off very quickly in just half of a batch of chickens as we're running them right now to get started. So even if these last us a couple years, they more than pay off their value. And it's a low enough cost that we don't have to go into debt. We can just face that with cash that we have on hand, which helps again with the business profitability. One of the main adaptations we made from the typical design is instead of using the big metal dolly, which is welded together with wheels and slides under there and vaults the whole tractor, we just put in some of these hooks and rigged up a little wheel axle with wheels, these little sturdy handles. So when we want to move it, we just slide the axle under the hook and it lifts the back enough that we can come around and grab onto this little handle here and move the tractor forward. And so far we've been pretty happy with that adaptation. These are quite easy to move even in some of the undulating parts of our pastures. Another main reason for going with this design is that we're still learning our predator pressure on the farm. From just observing in our time here, it's clear that there are pretty significant coyote populations, pretty significant fox populations, and since we don't have any guardian dogs this year, well, though we plan on getting some in the future, we feel like going with as secure of a design as possible just minimizes our risk getting started. We feel really confident that these tractors are predator proof after running several batches already this year. There's been no issues whatsoever, and I think it's part of why it's a good model to get started on, even if it's not what you go for in the long run, just as you learn the predator pressures of a new place, or perhaps if it's a place you've been farming on, learning how to run that enterprise, again, in a proven way. Now, on that note, in the future, we want to adapt this enterprise and how we have the chickens on pasture to give them a bit more of a free-ranging access to the space. Again, getting a livestock guardian dog in here is going to be paramount to us feeling like that's not too high of a risk. But also, we figure if we can get started and dial in the profitability and feed ratios and just getting a really secure and functioning enterprise up and running with a proven model, then we're ready to move on and adapt into perhaps more unproven models or ones that inherently have a bit more risk. This is an area that we bring pigs on to the farm when they first get here. as little 8-week-old feeders, and I seeded it with buckwheat, which has since flowered and gone to seed, and that was interplanted with sunflowers, which are on this beautiful July day just in absolute peak beauty. And the plan in here is to rotate a cover crop regime when pigs aren't on the farm, so that there's a diverse and interesting access to forage food sources for the feeders when they arrive before we move them into the woods. So the next batch of pigs that come to the farm will be getting here in late August, and by that point these will have gone to seed, and I can mow them down, run the pigs on them, and then once I move them to the woods, plant some tillage radish and some forage turnips that'll grow up over the fall that will have a similar value and utility to the pigs that arrive in January on the farm. The Tithonia just started to bloom. One of my favorite summertime flowers. It's just such a beautiful color orange. So yeah, that's it for today's video. I wanted to talk just a little bit about being thrifty on the farm and looking for access to alternative resources besides just going out and buying brand new things all the time. It can take a lot of patience. When I found that trailer, it was after quite a few weeks of searching and not purchasing more expensive options, but I found that holding out for nice reclaimed materials pays off, and that asking around from different industries and businesses that may have a big waste stream that we could hop in and intercept. I plan on only buying brand new lumber for projects where it's absolutely necessary because of this connection I have with the local mill. And I'm sure that it's a similar situation in a lot of different parts of at least the United States. It's really hard to get started on small farming enterprises at a small scale while you dial in the processes and grow a business naturally when saddled with unnecessary debt. And while it can be expensive to farm, I'm really interested in finding ways to minimize what expenses we have, particularly on things that we have a lot of control over, like the startup costs of different enterprises and the infrastructure therein. So I always love to see farm ingenuity on different farms. Farmers have a really good way of scrapping different things together to make it work, and you know, it's a really kind of lost gift in a lot of ways to be thrifty and to embody thrift with so many materials, brand new materials, readily available to us at all times. So it's something that inspires me when I see on other farms, and something I just wanted to share a little bit about. So if you like the video, please make sure to like the video and subscribe and leave a comment. I'm curious about other folks scrapped together or thrifted farm projects and how they've put them to work and how long they've lasted and what's been learned in that process. So if you have any stories about that, that'd be really interesting to share. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.